Once again, a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the virtual roundtable on Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, organized by the Ministry of Local Government and Housing Sarawak and supported by Sarawak Development Institute. I wish to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Billy Bujang, Sections Head of Public Health, Environment and Enforcement Sections of the Ministry of Local Government and Housing, representing the Permanent Secretary of Ministry of Local Government and Housing, Madam Lilia Sim, Chief Executive Officer of Sarawak Development Institute, distinguished speakers and moderators, all the participants comprising secretaries from local councils, public health officers, community development officers, and staff of the Ministry of Local Government and Housing Sarawak, as well as those from other agencies who are assisting the roundtables today. I would like to also welcome those who are joining us via UKA's Facebook and YouTube channel live as well. To start the roundtable sessions this morning, we will now proceed with the opening remarks by Yang Berhormat Datuk Sri Dr. Sim Kui Hian, Minister of Local Government and Housing Sarawak. Yang Berhormat Datuk Sri is unable to join us live this morning, but we will listen to his opening remark via a video presentations.
A very good morning and selamat selaku sayang to all the webinars participants and papers presenters. First and foremost, I wish to express my sincerest thanks to all our partners, the SDI, for organizing this virtual roundtable webinar on Sustainable Development Goals for Sarawak local authorities. This event comes at a very appropriate time as it is a follow-up to the United Nations call to adopt a Sustainable Development Goals in which Malaysia is one of the 193 signatory countries to commit and its implementation till the year 2030. I also wish to extend my thanks to the expert speakers who shall be guiding our Sarawak local authorities throughout this SDG 2030 webinar. The SDG 2030 is a critical component that will help to put into perspective the recently launched post-COVID development strategy 2030 of Sarawak government. With the goals set in place, it shall guide the local authorities to focus on areas of critical concern that needs to be prioritized, especially the post-COVID action plans. Ladies and gentlemen, this journey we are about to embark in will need everyone's cooperation through meaningful partnership with communities, civil societies, and private sectors. This is a shared responsibility we must chart out together so that no one is left behind. No suffering is left out to enjoy the prosperity and success of our labors. The ministry will make it a point to follow through with the KPIs set by the local authorities in the SDG 2030. Focus so as to ensure they receive support needed. With this, I wish you all a fruitful session in your webinar and I look forward to the resolutions that come out of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Yang Berhormat for the message. I was informed also Yang Berbahagia Dato' Antonio Katigalis, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry, had just joined us. Welcome, Dato'. So, we will now proceed with the program proper for this morning, where we will listen to the 4 presentations by the distinguished speakers. But before we proceed to the paper presentations, I just want to go through a few housekeeping informations and a gentle reminder to ensure a smooth sessions for everyone this morning. So first is please kindly on the attendance again, for those who have just joined us, the participants do remember to scan to register your attendance so that the ministry is able to track the daily attendance. Then the second one is please kindly mute the microphones to avoid any distractions during the paper presentations. And the participants are welcome to submit your questions and during the paper presentations in the chat box. So the questions will be only addressed after all the presentations, all the 4 presentations are done later on. So if the time permits, we will allocate time for live engagements. For everyone informations, especially those who are joining us via UCA's channels, the Q&A sessions is only for the roundtable participants. So with that, I will now proceed to the first paper. So the first paper is on the Sustainable Development Implementations in Malaysia, which will be presented by Encik Abdul Rahim Abdul Hamid, Deputy Director 2, and Cik Melissa Mokhtar, Principal Assistant Director from Environment and Natural Resources Economic Divisions.
Recording in progress.
Under Economic Planning Unit, Malaysia, under the Prime Minister Departments. So before we proceed to the paper presentations, I will briefly introduce Encik Abdul Rahim Abdul Hamid and also Cik Melissa Mokhtar. So Encik Abdul Rahim has served under the various agencies under the Prime Minister's Department, namely Implementations Coordinations Unit, Malaysian Maritime Enforcement Agency, and currently the Economic Planning Unit since 2010. Prior to his current positions at the Environment and Natural Resources Economic Divisions, he was with the Manufacturing Industry Science and Technology Divisions, Service Industry Divisions, and Energy Division. The second speaker for this paper is Cik Melissa Mokhtar, the Principal Assistant Director at the SM Divisions. So Cik Melissa began her career in Malaysian Civil Service in 2008 as a diplomatic and administrative officer. Upon completion of her civil service training and obtained her diploma in public management from National Institute of Public Management, she was assigned to the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, MITI, for 7 years, handling portfolios in investment policies, ASEAN, APEC, as well as appointed as a special officer to the former Secretary General of MITI, Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Dr. Rebecca Fatima Santa Maria. In 2018, she was briefly assigned in the Civil Service Delivery Unit, CSDU, and later to Economic Planning Unit, Prime Minister's Department, specifically in Environment and Natural Resources Economic Division. Her portfolios include assisting in formulations of policies and strategies, as well as coordinating efforts for Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. With that, I will invite Encik Abdul Rahim and Cik Melissa to begin the presentations. Over to you. Cik Kode, under Puan Alzina. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Rosalind. Yeah, I'm Rahim.
Thank you.
I'll be representing Cik Kode. Sorry for Cik Kode cannot join at the very last minute. We have very important things to do because as we all know that the 12 Malaysia plan is about to be launched by the early of next week. So a lot of things happening in EPU right now. So bear with us.
Thank
so
you.
Okay.
Yeah. Over to you.
Thank you. Sorry, Ms. Rosalind, do you have our slide with you?
You want us to share the slides? Or your side is sharing the slide?
Yes, is possible, please?
hold on. Yeah, hold on. Let me getting the slides.
Macam nak dia sudah buka kan? Dia buka.
The host, maybe can you enable me to share screens? All right. So you just let me know when to turn the slide.
All right. Okay, thank you so much. Sorry for the inconvenience. Can I start now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullah, distinguished guests. First of all, I would like to thank to the organizer, Sarawak Development Institute, for having this event. I can say this is a very important event for the whole country because SDGs is not an unusual thing now because we have to embed the SDGs as part of our activity today. So as we all know that EPU, Economic Planning Unit of the Prime Minister Department has been nominated as the national focal point as well as the coordinator of the SDGs for the national. So as for that, today's event is very important because at the end of the day, we would like to see how the SDGs have been implemented in Malaysia, but also how we localize into the state levels as well as the community levels. That is very important aspiration set to the nation. Okay. Today with me, I do have my colleague, Ms. Melissa. I can say she's an expert in the SDGs. I'm quite new actually in this division. Even though I've been in EPU for quite some time, since 2010, but I've been in various divisions. I started with manufacturing industries, and then I go for services industries, securities, but nothing to do with SDGs. So I can say that I've been quite left out about the SDGs since I joined EPU, but today, I think after joining the environmental division, I can see that the SDG is something important for every one of us. So with us, not only Melissa, we also have Puan Liza from our social development division, which she will cover not to present, but she'll prepare for any question and answer. Anything that related to social development, healthcare, as well as local authorities matters. So it's going to be very direct to all of you, I think. So can we go to the next slide, please? Next. Okay. So I think for every presentation, it's good to know where the SDGs come. No, before that, can we go back one slide before? Okay.
Sorry.
The slide is going everywhere.
Which one?
Okay, yeah, thank you. So it's important to know the concept of sustainable development goals. So actually, ladies and gentlemen, it has started since 1972. There are a series of discussion. The concept of sustainable development goals has gone through the test of time along various channels in the United Nations system. So you can see from the slide, there are a series of activities, discussion happened starting from 1972. So what's important here, if you can see on 2012, This is where the first concept of SDG has been mooted at the global level. So the concept of SDGs was born with the objective of producing a set of universal, applicable goals that balance the three dimensions of sustainable goals that focus on environmental, social, and economic. So before 2012, I think most of us know about the Millennium Development Goals, right? So the Millennium Development Goals is actually continue with the SDGs, starting from 2014, around 2014, 2015. So they started with the 8 goals with 70, compared to SDG already have 70 goals. So at first, MDGs only focus more on certain important criteria, but when the SDG came, it now focuses more on no poverty, zero hunger. This means that they have spread some of the target to be benefited by many areas or disciplines. So in this slide also you can see on 2015, this is where the important year where the first 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals were mooted. So on the same year is where Malaysia subscribed to the SDG goals. So I think we can go to the next slide, Rosalind.
This is
So in 27,
sorry.
Okay. So the Sustainable Development Goals Summit were hosted in in New York, America, on 27 September 2015, where 193 world leaders who are members of the United Nations, including Malaysia, agreed to adopt the document. This is the first document of SDG, Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development during the United Nations Summit. So what's important here, when SDG came into the country, they set 17 goals with 245 indicators, sorry. So, but of which, out of 245 indicators, we have identified only 128 applicable to Malaysia, which are suitable to sustainability and prioritization. So can you go next? This is very important slide, everyone. So this is how the SDGs are mapped. This is how the clustering the 17 goals for the SDGs according to the 5 Ps and the dimension. You can see out of 17 goals, 5 were clustered into that are referring to peoples and clustering into a dimensions criteria like social. So another 5 goals, 8, 9, 10, and 11 are focused more on economy, which lead to the outcome of prosperity. And another 5, 6, 12, 13, 14, and 15 is more focusing on environment, which is conserving and saving the planet. So the other 2 is more on the peace and partnership. But what important goals here, you can see the number 70 is the key success of the SDG. So because it considers the partnership of the whole of the goals of SDG. So this is where the whole of nation approach comes from. So what's important today is to understand how we derive the goals at the national levels. We can draw down into the state levels and subsequently to community levels. So to achieve the whole 70 goals is quite challenging, but I think with the whole of nation, with everybody participation, it can be done. So the whole goals are considered interlinkages, because if you can't achieve one, you may not achieve the other one. It's a like zero-sum game, right? If we put more on development, we might lose more on the green. So that's kind of interconnection is quite important. So this is where the collaborations and partnership between each of us are important. Okay, I think my colleague, Madam Melissa, will cover the rest of the slide. She will focus more on the details, how the implementations SDG in Malaysia. She will cover how we localize the SDGs. So I think take advantage to understand more about the SDGs implementation in Malaysia. I think this is my last slide. I hand over to you, Madam Melissa. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Encik Rahim. Okay, so I'll be talking about how we implement the SDGs in Malaysia, how we, after the adoption. So next slide, please. Okay, next. Okay, so sustainable development, as Encik Rahim has explained, the history is sustainable development concept is not new to Malaysia. So we have been incorporating the sustainable development since the first Malaysia plan, and it has been strengthened in the third Malaysia plan, where we have incorporated the environment chapter, Environment Act. We have put in place in the third Malaysia plan, and it has the social, economic, and environmental dimension has been included in all our national development plan, in the medium-term plans and the long-term development plans. And even in the Vision 2020 and the Shared Prosperity Vision, we have included all these three dimensions. Next slide. So our Malaysia's journey towards sustainable development intensified in the 1970s when the new economic model, the economic policy to eradicate poverty, restructure social imbalance was launched. So if you can see, the dimension of the social, environment, and economy dimension are mirrored towards our new economic model. Social is more towards the people, the inclusivity that we have in the new economic model. Environment reflected in the sustainability pillars in the new economic model, and economy is where we want to achieve the high income nation as outlined in the new economic model. And this has been reflected in our national development plans since in the 11th Malaysia Plan and the midterm 11th Malaysia Plan. Next slide, please. So here as a SDG focal point, we have established the Sdg Governance Structure. We have aligned the SDGs to our National Development Plan, and we also have been developed monitoring and reporting system of the SDGs to the United Nations by developing the dashboard and monitoring through the voluntary national review, which I will explain further in my next slides. So EPU, we are the focal point for the National Development Plan. All the ministers' agencies will report to us on the projects, development projects. So that's why I think that's why we are being appointed as the focal point, because we oversee the whole National Development Plan. Next slide, please. So after the adoption in 2015 in the United Nations, the SDG Summit, in the national, we have established the Sdg Governance Structure. So initially we have 5 working committees. Inclusivity, it covers goal 1, 2, 5, and 10. Working committee well-being covers goal 3, health. Goal 11, sustainability, cities and communities. Goal 16 on the peace, justice, and strong institution is covered on working committee well-being. And working committee on human capital only covers for goal 4, quality education, which covers for the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Higher Education. On environment and natural resources, working committee focus on the environment dimension, which is goal 6, 7, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Working committee on economic growth is 8, 9, and 17. Working committee finance for sustainable development is led by Ministry of Finance, and it has only been established this year after we have working on the voluntary national review. And all these working committees, 6 working committees, had to report to the National Steering Committee, which is chaired by the Director General of Economic Planning Unit. And we will formulate SDG roadmap, and we set targets and monitor the progress. We identify the issues and reports to the National SDG Council, which is chaired by the Right Honourable Prime Minister. So far, we have not convened the National SDG Council. There are plans to do this, but it's up to the Prime Minister's availability. If we don't have so far we don't have any meetings for National SDG Council. We only report it to the Cabinet, where we brought the voluntary national review. The report has been approved by the Cabinet, and where we have reported in the United Nations High-Level Political Forum last July. Next. So these are the example that how we align the 17 goals of the SDGs to our National Development Plan. This is a midterm review of the 11th Malaysia Plan, where certain goals are aligned to the pillars. As you can see, there are some of the goals are repetitive to the pillars. For example, goal 16, you can find it in pillar 1, 2, and 3, because as Encik Rahim has mentioned before, the goals are interrelated. It's interlinkages, so it can be found in the other pillars. Even goal 8, you can see that it's relevant in pursuing balanced regional development while empowering human capital in the pillars, and strengthening economic growth, pillar 3, 4, and 6. Next slide. Okay, this slide is showing that how the financing by the government, how we finance SDGs by the government. So we use our operating expenditure. We also use the development expenditure to finance the SDGs. So what we have been doing since our national development plans have been aligned to SDGs, I don't think there should be extra allocation of resources that needs to be allocated for SDGs. So we will align. The Minister of Finance also have been in the midst of tagging SDGs towards the budget, and we should be more comprehensive. So it shows that we have been doing this since ages. So it's not something new. Next. So the SDG National Progress, I mentioned before that voluntary national review is part of voluntary reporting by a nation to the United Nations High-Level Political Forum. Since the adoption, the UN has asked member states to submit national progress reports on SDGs, and which is called the voluntary national review. This is a voluntary report by countries, which is to assess and to take stock our SDG progress. This is to promote accountability, transparency, and encourage dialogue on shared experiences between countries. So in support of the global monitoring and reporting of the 2030 agenda, Malaysia has presented VNRs at the 2017 and 2031 United Nations High-Level Political Forum. This is a commitment that the government has dedicated to perform every 4 years, aligned with our Malaysia plan. So 11 Malaysia plan, we have come up with voluntary VNR 2017, and for the 12 Malaysia plan, we have come up with the 2021 VNR, and also after 4 years, it will be aligned with the 30 Malaysia plan. This is for the first VNR, the theme for every year will be different, and it will target different goals. So in 2017, the theme was eradicating poverty and promoting prosperity in a changing world. So the target was goal 1, 2, 3, 5, 9, 14, 15, and 17. And it was focused mainly on poverty. And 2017, since it was new, government has only established the governance structure. So the report mainly focused on government initiatives. But on 2021, the theme was a sustainable and resilient recovery from COVID-19 pandemic. And the target was goal 1, 2, 3, 8, 10, 12, 13, 16, and 17. So the highlight was the progress of SDGs post-COVID-19 pandemic. So what we have what's the difference between this report, between the first report, is that the second report is, we have taken a whole of nation approach, where we have taken inputs and board articles from various stakeholders. We have the board articles are mainly written by the academic and the private sectors and CSOs. Next. Okay, the progress of SDG data indicators. For SDG data, Department of Statistics Malaysia is leading for the SDG data, and they have undertaken assessment of data availability since 2017. So there are 244 indicators in SDGs, and in 2017 they have found out that there are only 48% of data available in 2017. So and last year they have come up with the assessment again, and they have they say that the data available has been increased to 52%. The data that they get is from mainly from ministries and agencies, but they also got it from other stakeholders, from UN agencies, private sector, academia, and CSOs. Next. Okay, this is a SDG dashboard. This SDG data monitoring system. It has been launched in 2019 by Department of Statistics Malaysia. Users can actually access this through the link mysdg.dozen.gov.my. It has completed the phase 1. So the data mainly is, you can find the data mainly on goal 1, 3, and 4. A lot of data mainly comes from Ministry of Health and Ministry of Education for this system. But for data on environment goals, we are still developing it for the phase 2. Next. Okay, these are 3 reports that has been published by DOSM. You can see from the 2018, the first one that they assess how many data available for the SDG indicators. You can see that some of the indicators are not relevant to Malaysia, so they have assessed this in the 2018 report. And 2019, so SDG indicator 2018, they have come up how many indicators that are available. The data you can find in 2018 report, and 2019 where they have increased the data availability for 126 indicators in 2019. Next. Okay, this is the status of SDG indicators. So in 2019, 99 out of 244 indicators available, the data available, and has been increased from 41% to 51% to 126 available indicators, or 247 indicators. So you can see on the right side, the data, 92% are mainly for goal 3, which are available from Ministry of Health. Next. These are some of the snapshot achieved of our SDG achievements in Malaysia. You can see that we have improved our incidence of poverty from 7.6% in 2016 to 5.6% in 2019. And literacy rates, our 96.7% population using safely managed drinking water services. These are some of the achievements for goal 1 to 8. And the next slide also shows the achievement, snapshot achievement that we have for goal 9 to 17. These are available in the DOSM 2019 report. Next. Okay, Sdg Localization. Since 2030 agenda for sustainable development is a global agenda, it's a big agenda. So how the agenda must not only be top-down approach from national to subnational government, but it has to come up, it has to be from bottom-up approach as well. So that's how the 2030 agenda emphasize on localizing the SDGs. So what the Urbanist has come up with the Malaysia SDG Cities report. This will help benchmark or guidance for local authorities, local government, how we can actually how we can translate the global agenda to the streamline to state and national policies. The Malaysia SDG Cities Report also can help for cities to prioritize the SDG goals that they want to focus on, and also help encourage the local authorities to come up with the voluntary local review. Voluntary local review is for local authorities and local government to come up with a report, just like the voluntary national review is for the national reporting to the United Nations. Local authorities do have the opportunity to report to the United Nations on their progress on their cities. Next. So this year, two city council have presented voluntary local review in United Nations this year. Shah Alam City Council and Subang Jaya City Council. For Shah Alam, they only focus on 5 SDG goals. SDG 1, no poverty. SDG 11, sustainability, cities and community. Goal 12, responsible consumption production. Goal 13, climate action. And goal 15, life on land. You can see goal 1, no poverty is on social. Goal 11 on economy. Goal 12, 13, 15 are on environment goals. It's similar to Subang Jaya. They only focus on social, economic, and environment dimension. Goal 3, 5, 8, 11, 12, 13, and 16. For Shah Alam, they focus more on environment goals because they have low carbon city project. And they also come up with Shah Alam low carbon city roadmap. And so it's mainly depends on the local authorities, the local government, what you like to focus on, what are your strengths, and what you want to probably work on the goals. So these are examples that what the city council focus on. And you can see on the next slide, some of the local authorities have come up with projects. They want to focus on their cities, on their communities. So for Shah Alam City Council, they focus on low carbon city project, where they explain that if the residents somehow save their electricity bill, somehow can manage to show how they save their energy consumption, they can actually get a rebate. That's how Shah Alam City Council tried to do for the low carbon city project. And for Alor Gajah Municipal Council, they come up with the Pulau Semut Village Sustainable Communities, is to encourage the communities for sustainable farming on the agriculture. Next. Same thing with the Pasir Gudang Municipal Council. They want to encourage the PPR residents to do community farming. So they come up with community farming initiative program. These are some of the and Melaka Green Tech Corporation, they also have they work with MGTC. They do the Eco School Melaka program to encourage the school children to recycle, and this is more on the goal 12 and 13. These are some of the examples of the SDG localization by local authorities. This can be something to ponder and discuss by probably by the audience, the Sarawak KPKT. And with this, I end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Encik Rahim and also Cik Melissa for the insightful presentations. So we will only take the questions and answer after all the presentation. So we hope that Encik Rahim and also Cik Melissa will stay back. So we welcome all the participants who have any questions to EPU to maybe send the questions in the chat box. And we will address them during the questions and answer sessions at the end of the paper presentations. So now move on to the second paper presentations, which is on waste management and SDG in Malaysia by Professor Agamutu Paratambi from Jeffrey Sachs Center, Sunway University. A bit of background on Professor Dr. Agamutu. He is a senior professor in the Jeffrey Sachs Center on Sustainable Development at Sunway University. Prior to this, he was attached to University of Malaya for 44 years. He is a fellow of the Academy of Sciences Malaysia. He is appointed as the high-level foreign expert for the Ministry of Science and Technology, China. And he is also a visiting professor for Zhejiang University of Technology in Hangzhou, China. He is currently the Senior Editor-in-Chief of Waste Management and Research, a peer-reviewed journal. And he also sits on the editorial boards of several other journals, such as Journal of Material Cycles and Waste Management, and Journal of Safety and Environment. He is the Vice President of the Society of Solid Waste Management Experts in Asia and Pacific Islands, SWAPI, SWAPI. He is the founder head of the Center for Research in Waste Management and the founder president of the Malaysian Society of Waste Management and Environment. Currently, he is the chairman for the Organizations for Climate Change, OFCC Malaysia. He is also a member of International Solid Waste Association, ISWA. That is the very quite extensive background of Professor. So with that, I now pass over the time to Professor Agamutu to start the presentation. Over to you.
Thank you, Rosalind. Thank you very much for the extensive introduction. And I wish to say good morning to all the participants, and let me share screen of my topic. Okay, here you are, and there you go. Yeah, I'm going to talk about waste management in sustainable developments in Malaysia, and I will try to keep to the topic in the sense that I will emphasize on municipal solid waste for time constraint, because I don't think I can cover hazardous waste and industrial waste and so on. But I think I will also keep to the importance of the sustainable development goals pertaining to waste management. Okay, and of course I will try my best to cover associated topics, like for example circular economy, food waste and so on, which are obviously related to waste management very closely. And I will start with the generation of municipal solid waste in Malaysia. I think some of you may actually know that we are generating about 14 million tons annually. That's about 40,000 tons a day. And our per capita generation is more than 1 kg. And why do I say more than 1 kg? I think this is very important because, the waste people, they consider that if you generate more than 1 kilogram per day per person, you are actually considered as a developed country. I don't want to argue with you whether we are developed or not, but this is the unofficial definition of the waste quantity. But I must also warn you that this is the national average of 1.17 kilograms per person per day. Our own study actually has revealed that in Malaysia, the per capita generation actually ranges from anything from 0.5 kilograms per person in some of these rural areas to 2.5 kilograms in the city. So we have measured 2.5 kilograms in Kuala Lumpur per person per day, which is equal to the amount of waste generated by the citizens in US, the highest generators in the world. Unfortunately, 70% of the municipal waste actually end up in the landfills and open dumps in Malaysia, because we don't have other options. We don't actually use incineration on a large scale, or composting for that matter. And as a result, we do have waste that is being illegally disposed or illegally burnt. But on the other hand, I would say that waste collection is on par with the developed nations, at least in the urban municipal solid waste. And I will emphasize on this later on the waste collection dilemma in some of these rural areas and all these out of city zones, and also in some specific countries like in Nepal or in Bhutan and so on, where it's mountainous, and what are the challenges that they face. I will mention when I come to that slide. So we do have a lot of illegal dumping and illegal burning, and this is actually very worrying because this contributes to the marine debris, which is, Malaysia is one of the largest contributor of marine debris, which eventually becomes the microplastics and so on. And although the National Solid Waste Department actually puts a target of 40% of recycling, but currently we only have achieved 28%. Now, please, when you look at these numbers, 28% and 40%, don't catch me on this and say that, oh, you told it's 28, now it's 30, because the number keeps changing and it's reliable only to the extent of when it's taken. There are about 296 landfills in Malaysia, but I think only 116 landfills are currently operational. And the rest have been either closed or there's no waste being dismissed there. And out of these, sanitary landfill is only 21 out of these 160 operating landfills. But my personal visit to some of the so-called sanitary landfills also shows that they do not have a real sanitary landfill. Like, for example, in one town where they have the leachate treatment facilities, but no liner material or no cover material, but they still call themselves sanitary landfill. But whatever, the number given is 21. And the second thing that I want to discuss is the waste composition. And of course, a lot of people have studied waste composition, and this is our own data from University Malaya results. And you can see that, as usual in all developing countries, the highest portion is the food waste. This is the waste that comes from your kitchen. It could be anything from food materials to skin and so on. And other things that I'd like to highlight here is actually the household hazardous waste. The household hazardous waste is a very, very serious thing, although it's only 1 to 2%, because this actually contains things like the battery or fluorescent light that people throw, and this contaminates the whole waste. And so the waste, when it's discarded into the landfill, this household hazardous waste actually causes a lot of problems. And one of the reasons that we cannot actually carry out composting, although our material is organic, we have a lot of organic portion, like food waste is organic, we have garden waste is organic, so the total may come to more than 65%. But why are we not doing composting? And one of the biggest reasons is this household hazardous waste. And this actually causes contamination of the compost, and that is one of the big issues with household hazardous waste. And also things like diapers, for example, these are what we call mixed waste or heterogenic waste, because it has got more than 2 or 3 or 4 components like paper, plastic, and fiber. Now, these kind of things that can only go to incineration. It cannot go to a landfill, but it does in Malaysia. And so it sits there for a long, long time, maybe even more than 100 years, especially the plastic portion stays there. And we also have plastic, which is anything from 14%, and we have recorded up to 24% plastic in some of the Malaysian cities. So the range is there. So this is the average, 13% plastic and paper and so on. Now, I want to show you another composition. This is also our own data, but more detailed for Kuala Lumpur. And I want to highlight another thing here. If you look at the first one is food waste, that is 29%. We have another category called unconsumed food. Unconsumed food, here I put that 12%. Now, of course, there are a couple of slides on food waste later. What I'm trying to impress you here is that Malaysians are throwing a lot of food without eating. They buy, for example, a bun or a bread, and they didn't consume it. And after, say, 1 week, the fungus grows and you throw it away. And that is called unconsumed food. It doesn't actually come from the kitchen. So you can see that the total organic waste is still about 40 or 45%. But what is worrying is that this unconsumed food is actually something that worries, because when I started this looking at unconsumed food 20 years ago, it was almost zero. But now it is in Kuala Lumpur, it's about 12%. Nationally, it is about 10%. So this is quite worrying because, you know, we have so much we are throwing away without consuming, just because maybe people are very busy, or they just they don't have the time to consume what they buy, and then they just throw it away. So this is one of the bad habits that Malaysians have, and it is actually getting from bad to worse. And of course, I'm not going to go through the whole list of materials here, because if you think that this is detailed, you must see some of the studies the Japanese do is double this. They give you so much more detail about the waste composition. Anyway, the important thing is to show you the unconsumed food. And the other one, of course, as I mentioned earlier, is the hazardous waste in the household waste that you throw that is causing problems for waste management. And as I mentioned in the last slide, food waste is a very, very important part of the waste management. And here I've given you some numbers. Of course, you don't have to memorize these numbers, but I hope that looking at these numbers, you will understand why I'm emphasizing the word food waste. 30% of the world's total energy consumption actually goes for food making. 30% of the world's total energy consumption goes to the food sector. And also, they release 22% of the total greenhouse gas. Okay, 22% of total greenhouse gas comes from the food sector. That means you know that they contribute so much for global warming. Now, if you just stop locally, Malaysia, as I mentioned earlier, we have about 10% food waste, unconsumed food. I'm talking about unconsumed food, 4,000 tons a day. And this is from the 40,000 tons of waste we generate every day. So you can see that that's about 10% national average. This is unconsumed food, not the food waste. Food waste, of course, is 45% of the total. And the world consumption of materials have hit a record of 100 billion tons a year in 2020. So that's the amount of material we are consuming. It doesn't matter whether it is food or whether it's other resources, 100 million tons. And since 1970, the population has doubled. But the material consumption has quadrupled. That means it has gone 4 times higher. Okay, population is only doubled, but the amount of material we are consuming is 4 times more. And how much food is wasted? 1.3 billion tons of food produced is wasted. 1.3 billion tons of food produced is wasted, and the food value is about $1 trillion each year. This is each year we are losing so much because of the poor transportation or harvesting practices. And on the other hand, we have 1 billion people who are actually undernourished. They mean they don't get any vitamins or anything basically required for human consumption. And another 1 billion people actually go hungry every day. So you can see that on the one hand, we have so much wasted, and on the other hand, we have 2 billion people who don't get enough food. And if you consider the food waste, it is the 3rd largest greenhouse gas producer after China and US. That means China and US, of course, they are one of the largest greenhouse gas producers. So food waste comes as a 3rd. If you consider food waste as a country, that means it's the 3rd largest producer of greenhouse gas. And more recently, of course, even Malaysia is talking about food security, because I think we just saw the other day, we are importing food to the tune of about 55 billion from overseas. That means we are depending so much on importing food material, and our food security is a real question mark. And I think this is something that needs serious attention. And if you look at where does the waste come from, I will not go through this slide in all detail. Just look at Southeast Asia. So this is Southeast Asia. And the amount of waste we are losing in agriculture is about 30%. So this is 1, 2, 3, 30% we are losing in the agricultural production. And then another 20% we lose in the post-harvest. That means when we are harvesting, we lose about 1, 2, 3, 35% we lose in the harvesting, like harvesting paddy or harvesting palm oil or whatever, we lose about 35%. And then the processing is not so bad, we lose about 10% in the processing. And distribution, we lose about 15%. And in the consumption stage, we lose about 10%. That means if you go to, say, for example, a buffet lunch or buffet dinner, we still waste about 10%. This is what it means here. 10% we lose in the consumption stage. So this is for Southeast Asia, including Malaysia. So you can see that our bigger loss is here. That is in the agricultural production and harvesting. We lose about 60 or 65 to 70% we lose here itself. Okay. Now, I think when you have time, you can compare, like, for example, consumption, like in Europe and North America, in the eating, they lose 30%. We only lose about 10% in the consumption stage. So this is for food waste. Now, let's look at the municipal solid waste flow and plastic flow. As I mentioned earlier, we have about 14 million tons of waste generated in 1 year. So very briefly, these are the amount, paper, plastic, and so on, which you already seen in the composition. Now, the amount of plastic is about 1.8 million tons. And out of this, the amount of plastic that is recycled is only 433,000 tons. And the amount of plastic disposed to the landfill is 1.4 million tons. So you can see that the bulk of the plastic that is produced actually end up in the landfill and not recycling. Okay, so a little bit of informal recycling is done. There's about 10%. So this is actually the paper lama people who come and collect, and maybe 1 or 2 NGOs collecting, and we only have 10% recycling of plastic taking place. So it's a very sad effect. And why is it a sad effect? Okay. If you look at this world map, there are 2 things that you need to look at it. The size of the circle actually tells you the amount of plastic waste generated. So, okay, America is one of the biggest generator of plastic, and also China. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, look at the red portion. The red portion actually means plastic mismanaged. Now, if you look at the red color is mostly in Asia. You don't have a lot of red colors in Europe or US. Okay, so China, for example, 75% of the plastic is mismanaged. Now let's come to our own data, Malaysia. More than, maybe about 60% of the plastic generated is mismanaged. That means it is not discarded properly. It is either disposed illegally or burnt or whatever. And that is what we mean by mismanaged. So you can see that the mismanagement of plastic is very rampant in Asia, including India and China and Indonesia. These are the biggest players. Actually, when you talk about plastic, and then we also talk about marine debris, plastic that eventually enters the ocean. China and Indonesia are the biggest players actually. Okay, so Malaysia is also one of the important players, but compared to China and Indonesia, we are less. So this is the problem. Plastic waste generation is one issue. Plastic waste mismanaged is the real issue. Because it's not that you generate the plastic, but are you recycling it? Actually, no. So if you look at how much plastic is really managed, now I told you 86% is disposed or littered. That means only 14% actually goes to the other items. So this is already bad. 86% is disposed or littered. And out of this 14%, 40% is landfill, 14% is incinerated. We have another 32% leaked into the environment, and then recycling is only 14%. Okay, so you can see that out of the recycled 14%, if you look at very carefully, effective recycling is only 2%. Okay, this is a global data. effective recycling is 2%. Then what happens to the other 12%? Recycle into lower value applicants, 8%. So the quality of the plastic is gone down. That's about 8%. And even in the recycling process, we lose 4%. Okay, so this diagram actually tells you, sometimes people talk a lot. They say that, oh, we are recycling 14%. Is it really 14%? So we need to look at exactly how much is really recycled, not the 14%. So if you look at the monetary value for the amount of material that we are losing here, we are losing here, we are losing here, and we are losing here 4%, it's about 80 to 120 billion. 80 to 120 billion worth of material value is lost every year because of the low recycling rate of most plastic packaging. So that is the amount of material worth we are losing. Yeah? Okay, now let me look at some of the issues of illegal dumping and illegal burning. This was taken in Malaysia. What is the cause of this? Actually, I'm still talking a little bit of plastic. I think many of you know that at one time when China, 2 years ago, when China banned the importation of plastic for recycling, the whole bunch of plastic from the route was diverted to Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, and so on. And of course, Malaysia also became one of the biggest illegal markets. It was illegally imported with and also illegally recycled in many parts of Selangor. And if they can't recycle, the irony is most of the plastic that comes in from the developed country actually cannot be recycled because it is also contaminated. And what do? They illegally burn it. This is open burning in Selangor that they do because of the quality of the plastic is bad. And of course, they have to send this to the landfill and they have to pay for the landfill tipping fee, which I think they find it easier to just illegally burn it, when no enforcement is around. So this is one of the issues of the waste. And of course, this is the second thing. Most of this plastic that came from developed countries, diverted away from China, actually ended up here like this. And then it is sitting in the pool of water. And of course, it is polluting the Malaysian water quality as well as the nearby river as well as the sea. And this is one of the problems of illegal plastic recycling. And now let me move on to the collection rate. I actually included this slide because of the request from Sarawak asking us explain what happens to the waste collection. Like, for example, it is not an issue. As I mentioned in my first slide, the waste collection in Malaysia, the urban centers in Malaysia is par with the developed nations. So we actually don't have any problem with the waste collection in the developed portion, like city of Kuala Lumpur, PJ, or maybe, I don't know, maybe even Kuching. But the problem is in the rural area and in other places. So if you can see, for example, in Yemen, for example, the waste collection is only about 18% and the Kazakhstan only about 30%. Even in Sri Lanka, the waste collection is only 34%. Okay, so only in developed countries, like for example, you can see here, for example, in Bahrain or China, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, and so on, of course, including Malaysia, we are able to achieve 100% waste collection. So in countries where the waste is not collected, what happens to the waste? Now, this is the other question of illegal dumping. So, of course, we need to train the people to actually manage their own waste if its waste is not collected. For example, in the rural areas of Sarawak, the people need to be trained on how to achieve zero waste within their community, which is possible. And I think it is important to realize that the challenges of waste collection, like especially in countries like Nepal, Bhutan, and these kind of mountainous countries, it's a challenge. It is a challenge because a normal compactor cannot actually go in that road. It's a very narrow road. So they do have small pickup, three-wheelers and so on. but the collection frequency is not as often as in a city like Kuala Lumpur may have a waste collection on a daily basis. In Petaling Jaya, it may be 3 times a week. And then as you go away from the city, maybe the waste collection is only once a week and then maybe twice a month. So again, the frequency actually affects the quality of the kind of waste collected and what happens to the waste not collected. So this is one of the biggest issue in waste management, that is waste collection. And this has some regulations. Maybe this is a little bit, mundane, but I just want to quickly go through to tell you that we do have regulations in Malaysia that promotes the resource recycling and so on, like the Environment Quality Act 1974. There is provisions for the minister to prescribe a substance to be reduced or recycled, blah, blah, blah. And then we also have the Environmental Quality Schedule Waste regulations. I must at this point say that Malaysia is very advanced in hazardous waste collection and treatment like a developed country. So that's not an issue, because I think 94% of the hazardous waste is actually either reused or recycled. So we don't have that much of an issue with hazardous waste. But I can't say the same thing for construction demolition waste in Malaysia. So the C&D waste, most of it is illegally dumped before the landfill, unlike countries like Japan and India, where the C&D waste is used almost 100% recycled. So well, some things we are good, some things we are bad. Okay, so these are some of the policies in Malaysia for resource circulation. The Solid Waste Corporation, or SW Corp, they launched the strategic plan for 2014 to 2020 to achieve the sustainable solid waste management services. And of course, some of the strategies covered here is to create the public awareness. I'm not so sure whether they were successful in this because waste separation is a real challenge in many parts of Malaysia. So they're supposed to create public awareness in terms of waste to wealth and waste separation and so on, change in behavior, sustainability of the material, improving solid waste facilities and technologies. Of course, this is ongoing. Enforcement of existing legislations and policies, and research and development. So of course, SW Corp realized that sustainable solid waste management will only be possible by implementation of the circular economy. So they actually say that, okay, we need to have circular economy. Although circular economy, I will come to that. I have a few slides on circular economy. Circular economy is more for industries in the beginning, but now we are talking about circular economy for the community. So therefore, all the strategies must work towards the long-term goal of zero waste nation. So this is in the 11th Malaysia Plan, championed by the Minister of Economic Affairs. So the emphasis is on sustainable consumption and production. So when I come to the sustainable development goals, I think I'll touch on this again. Also, renewable energy. Of course, the government is pushing towards renewable energy, although it's moving very slowly. Promote 3R and aim to 15% of biodiesel blend in the transport sector. Again, this is another object. So let me look at the sustainable development goals in Malaysia. So my coverage will be completely different from the previous speaker because I'm looking at it more holistically to waste management. So Malaysia, with all the other 192 world leaders, adapted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This is a global commitment towards a more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive development with 17 SDGs and 163 targets. So the SDGs are new, universal set of goals, targets, and indicators that UN member state will be expected to use to frame the agenda and political policies. There are more than 200 indicators that covers the 5 dimensions which were mentioned previously: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. Now, so the important thing is that there need to be an integration of environmental, economic, and social aspects. Then only you can get sustainable development. Now, what are the important SDGs promoting waste management? Okay. Now, these are the most important goals, although all the goals are relevant to waste management. I will come to the next 2 slides on that. Now you can see that, like for example, if you take goal number 8.4, so global resource efficiency in consumption and production. Now I have already told you in my earlier slide how much we are consuming and we are wasting. The consumption has increased 4 times more, but most of it is wasted. So this is another thing that we need to look at it. And then we are also looking at goal number 11. We are talking about reduce the adverse per capita environmental impact of cities, including by paying special attention to air quality and municipal and other waste management. So you can see that this goal number 11.6 is specifically for waste management. Then we also have goal number 12, which talks about half per capita global food waste. Now, I don't think I need to overemphasize it because I've already spent 2-3 slides on food waste. So here you can see that goal 12.13 is talking about making the food waste half. And like Malaysia, we throw 4,000 tons every day. Maybe we should reduce it to 2,000 tons. That's what they are suggesting. Same thing with 12.4. We have achieve environmentally sound management of chemicals and all waste throughout their life cycle. And then goal 12.15. Here we are talking about substantially reduce the waste generation. So here we are talking about not just 3R. We are talking about zero waste. That's to achieve zero waste, you need to implement circular economy and also to rationalize inefficient fossil fuel subsidies that encourage wasteful consumption. Okay, now if you look at this table, as I mentioned earlier, almost all the 17 SDGs are related to waste management in one way or another. And let me go through this very quickly, not in detail. No poverty, first goal number 1 here. By formalizing the informal sector, in many countries, especially developing countries like Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, we have, and India also, millions of people are actually involved in waste collection. They are actually scavengers going to the landfill and collecting. These people are called the informal sector. Now, for them, waste management is actually poverty. So they need to actually do the job to alleviate poverty. If you tell, okay, no informal sector should be in the landfill, then we are talking about actually increasing the poverty of these millions. Like in India, for example, 1% of the population is involved in informal sector waste collection. So you can see that we are talking about millions and millions of people. Number 2, no hunger. Now, you saw how much food we are wasting. So here we are talking about composting our landfilling. Maybe we'll improve the land and soil quality. So this is again, we are talking about waste reduction. Good health and well-being, reducing the landfilling, respiratory disease and annoyance could be avoided. So you know that it's air pollution effect. Number 4, by successful implementation of 3R, the demand for skilled people will increase in recycling. So like for example, in Japan, how the education has improved and achieved zero waste. Like goal 6, reduction in generation of waste to eliminate dumping of waste into the rivers. So we are talking about clean water and sanitation and reduction in the microplastic. Affordable and clean energy, we are talking about waste to energy. Of course, we don't have a large waste to energy plant in Malaysia like that in China or in Japan. In fact, China is going so fast in waste to energy that in Shanghai, they're building a waste to energy plant 5,000 tons a day, which will be the largest plant in the world. And well, we are still discussing to have a plant in Kuala Lumpur, in Malacca, and Johor, and well, it takes years before something really can be achieved. Resource efficiency through 3R or climate action, as I mentioned earlier, 5% of the greenhouse gas is contributed by waste management. So that is another thing. So you can see that many sustainable development goals are directly related to waste management, resource recovery, recycling, and so on. And so this brings us to the application of SDGs for your circular economy. Now, of course, we want to reduce, reuse, or recycling activities in the process of production and circulation. And this is to incorporate the circular economy. So this is to keep resources in use for as long as possible, extract the maximum value from them whilst in use, then recover and regenerate products and materials at the end of each service life. That means technically what we are saying is that nothing should come out of a process. That's what it says. So the important components is the avoiding the mining and extraction. So if we can keep using aluminum again and again, we don't have to do mining, for example. Reduces the demands on natural resources, reduces the carbon and other emissions, which is usually the case when mining, waste reduction, and reduce the usage of non-renewable energies. Now, this is an example. The diagram actually shows you what is linear economy. This is linear, which is being practiced in many parts of Malaysia, and this is circular. So here we see the raw material going in the production and use and recycling, but nothing actually comes out of the system. Okay, nothing comes out of the system. This is very important. This is what I mean by circular economy. And of course, as I said earlier, this was originally introduced for industrial purpose, but now everybody talks about circular economy in a society. And this diagram again actually clearly defines what is linear economy and what is circular economy. Okay, so in the linear economy, of course, we have waste coming out. Maybe we have pollution coming out and so on, but in the circular economy, we try to capture everything within the system. So this is more detail on the same thing, material cycle society. The Japanese, they like to call themselves the sound material cycle society, or they call it the zero waste concept. But circular economy was actually coined by the Chinese actually. So here again is the same thing. The circular part is here, but we are incorporating the reduction and reuse and material recycling, energy recovery, and so on. So this is basically the circular economy and 3R. So nothing should come out of the system. So, okay, so this is the 4 principles of circular economy. So a true circular economy is zero waste. Is it possible? Yes, it is possible. I've seen a kampung village in Surabaya where the kampung people actually have achieved the zero waste. So they actually collect all the waste, separate it, the recyclables they keep, and the non-recyclables they compost, and the water in the drain is taken in through a simple filtration which they themselves manufacture, and then the water they use for gardening, and the whole place looks very beautiful with full of flowers. And it is a zero waste concept which I personally seen in Surabaya. So when we want to look at success stories in Malaysia, frankly speaking, I can't say that we have an excellent example, except a few I'm going to give you now. For example, this is launched by the Global Environment Center in collaboration with the Recycle for Life by Senviro and funded by the Coca-Cola Foundation. So they are able to incorporate recycling program in schools so that 40,000 students from 80 schools in Klang Valley have benefited from this scheme, where they are taught how to incorporate zero waste initiatives, at least to begin with the recycling, and maybe in some places even a little bit of composting and so on. Another example we can see in University of Malaya, they have a center for waste collection and separation and composting. So here they diverted 700 tons of waste from the going to the landfill, and then they're actually composting it here. And of course, the compost is used in the large university area. And the third example is, this is in Penang City, where there is a zero waste initiative to a certain extent, where they're using the food waste, composting site, and so on. So as I said, I'm not able to give you something very comprehensive as a success story, except these few, but there are other examples in many parts of the world. So, of course, the Ministry of Housing Local Government has launched the Zero Waste Initiative in Malaysia using the single-use plastic banning. And this roadmap is also a very long roadmap from 2018 to 2030 to ban the single-use plastic. Well, our neighboring countries have banned it within a 3-year study. So even India has banned plastic in many parts of India and China. So what can Malaysia do? I think there are a lot of things that we can do, not just the public, the government, everybody has to get involved. So maybe we are talking about tax incentives be given for companies that undertake waste recycling management, like what they do in Japan. Members of the public be given some kind of rewards or redemption for turning recyclable plastic. I think this has already been beginning in New Delhi. There are actually these machines where you discard your bottles and you can credit certain money into your credit card. Australia has also implemented this redemption system. Companies should be encouraged to buy back their plastics, such as buying back empty bottles and so on. Recycling infrastructure in the country should be improved. I think we really don't have the kind of infrastructure that we see in developed nations for example, recycling of electronic waste or recycling of car battery or recycling of plastic. Innovation on the use and reuse of plastic should also be a priority. And extended producer responsibility, I think this is something that is lacking in Malaysia. I think we should encourage the producers to take back their products, particularly the industrial products, and then that will encourage zero waste. And we should be looking at zero waste, adapting circular economy, where every village or every city should incorporate. We don't have a circular economy for a city or like that. We may have circular economy incorporated in one particular industry. Okay, so that's possible. But what is happening in some places, like for example in China, the whole city, they've actually called a zero waste city or circular economy city, where the whole city must be involved in the whole process. So these are all practical things that can be done. So we should also look at sustainable consumption. Don't discard unconsumed food unnecessarily. Avoid buying products in one-time use packaging. Segregate your waste. I think this is the key to waste management in Malaysia. That is why we fail in so many things, like composting fails and waste recycling fails because of the contamination of the materials. So this is the basic thing that we need to adapt and buy products made from recycled or reused material. So almost at the end, we are looking at a balanced waste management hierarchy. So you can see that the green is actually what is considered good. That means waste reduction and sustainable consumption and production is what I'm recommending. And all the others are less important. The worst is landfilling and coaling. This is the worst, but this is what we are doing for most of our waste, unfortunately. And another new thing that is coming up in many places is landfill mining and reclamation. I understand in Penang, I think there is the largest landfill mining that is actually taking place now. But I think we have more than 100 landfills sitting there where the waste is not disposed anymore, but it's not being mined, and the materials there are actually wasted. That's resources that is wasted sitting in the landfills in Malaysia. So we should be looking at landfill mining as one of the options, and then of course waste reduction and sustainable consumption. So please eat less. And lastly, the way forward. So we are looking at to build a more reliable and comprehensive waste-related statistics. Being an academic, I can tell you that it is a challenge to get data from the government sources. Also, I can tell that now openly. It's not easy to get data on waste unless we do our own research, and of course it will be criticized by the relevant government agencies. Standardized definitions of waste streams, and then also improve the compliance of waste related regulations for better recycling, especially conduct studies and communicate the cost of inaction. This is being done by a lot of academia. And remediate contaminated dump sites, and this is what I mean by landfill mining. I think we can't just ignore the landfills that has been closed, and then we like for example, the landfill leachate may be flowing for the next 25 years. The landfill gas may be coming for another 5 to 10 years, even after closing. But nobody actually worries about it because you can't see the landfill gas, but it is there. So test the effectiveness of economic instruments for effective and sustainable waste management. whether you want to give incentives in terms of tax exemption or whether you want to reduce the quittance, whatever. It has to be tested, the effectiveness of the economic instruments. And lastly, promote reduction in resource use and improve resource use efficiency. So I've given a whole list of things that it can be done in terms of the resource use. And so with that, I would like to thank you for your patience to listen to my 40 minutes of discussion. And of course, I'll be very willing to receive any questions or explanations from the audience. And thank you very much. And just to show you, these are just some of my books. Okay. Thank you, Rosalind.
Thank you, Prof. Aga, for the comprehensive presentations. I believe this sharing definitely will be useful for the roundtable participants tomorrow. So I think with the permissions from the speakers, all the speakers later, we will share all the slides, this presentation slide with all the participants after the sessions today. So please keep all the questions first as for the question and answer later. We are sorry that we are not able to open the chat box for now. So we will now take a 15-minute break. So we will resume at 10:15, where we will listen to 2 more presentations from the speakers, namely Dr. Jason and Yang Berbahagia Professor Dr. Andrew. So we will see you at 10:15. 15-minute breaks for toilet breaks and thank you.
Allow me to start off by just giving a very brief introduction about who we are, about WWF Malaysia. Now, every time I go into villages, I go into kampongs, and I talk to people, people of my generation and the much more respected senior generations will probably think about WWF as something to do with wrestling. People always speak to me about. Yes, we did share the same name, but WWF, we actually fight for a better cause. We fight for the environment, we fight for conservation. The actual name is Worldwide Fund for Nature in Malaysia. So in short, it's WWF. It was actually established in 1972. If you work backwards, we'll be actually celebrating our 50-year anniversary in about 1 year's time next year. So it's a very significant journey that we have actually taken in Malaysia. We have over 200 staff members all across different parts of Malaysia, in Selangor, Sabah, in Sarawak, Melaka, Terengganu, Pahang, Perak, Kedah. There are actually field offices in all of these states. In Sarawak, we have our office in Kuching itself. We actually house in Bangunan Pinamas, which is people commonly know it as the HSBC in Padungan. So we're on the 7th floor. That's where we are. But right now, a lot of our staff are actually working from home because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're actually part of the global network. As you see this logo all across different parts of the world, we're actually part of this global network. And we have a national office here in Malaysia, and our HQ is actually in Petaling Jaya. We engage in biodiversity conservation, things related to policies, sustainable production, and also community development. I think this is one of the strengths we have is we work a lot with communities, with grassroots people on the ground itself. We do extensive work on conservation, protection, and management of ecosystems, conservation of species, for instance, like the tiger in Peninsula, the elephants in Sabah, marine turtles out in the sea, and orangutans, which is much closer to home here in Sarawak. We actually mobilize various stakeholders through a lot of means, advocacy, education, engagement. Sometimes we can be known as the noise. We actually channel or champion some of the voices of people on the ground upwards so that it can be heard. These are actually very active and healthy kind of participation in advocacy work. Just to conclude, we have a mission statement is to stop degradation of planet's natural environment and build a future. I'd like to stress here, for which humans, we put equally emphasis on humans, live in harmony with nature. So by doing all these steps, conserving biological diversity, ensuring use of renewable natural resources, and promoting reduction of pollutions and wasteful consumption. So our mission is for both human and nature. With that, I'd like to go into the proper of my presentation today. It's such a big topic about environmental sustainability, where I think I can't do so today. I'll start off with a little bit of introduction. One very specific topic that are of interest to me is life and zoonotic disease. I'll cover that in the presentation. Going to the next one on.
Your internet is a bit lagging.
So let me just give me a second. I'll turn off my video. Allow that to happen. Yep. Give me a second. Yep. Sometimes we do have this kind of problem. Okay. Just turn off my video just to preserve bandwidth. I hope it's better right now.
Yes.
I was just saying that I'll talk about introduction and talk about wildlife zoonotic disease. And the next bit, I'll cover a little bit about economic development and what is it in terms of environmental sustainability, how do we balance both? And I'll finish off with collective platform and how we can actually disclose this kind of information. And conclude it by giving some pointers on step forwards. How I've arranged my presentation today is to provide you some facts and information, and I put it in yellow box, some questions, which hopefully you can actually pick it up and use it in your next 1 day and 2 days of breakout group sessions later. Now to kick off, in terms of environmental sustainability, there are actually many definitions of how people actually define it, but all of this came out from way back in 1987 during the Brundtland Commission. actually a study that was commissioned during that time, known as the World Commission on Environment and Development, which is a subdivision of the United Nations. So there was a pursuit for the term sustainable development at that time. In general, what they define environmental sustainability is an act that we can actually ensure our future generations have the natural resources available to live an equal, if not better, way of life as the current generations. In other words, we need to leave something that is worth living for the future generations, whether it's your children, your grandchildren, your nephews, nieces, or whoever that we're actually handing the earth over to them. So that's what it is. In 1995, Goodland actually published this document, and it actually says environmental sustainability encompasses a few concepts, right? It's not only on environment and also natural capital, but it's connected to both social sustainability and economic sustainability. We have heard this morning from our EPU friends, who actually mentioned what this all SDG is about. It has to be linked to these three concepts about environment, sustainability, and also economic. Yeah. In the Brundtland Commission, also they coined this term on sustainable development. In short, it actually talks about a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generation to meet their own needs. So whatever development that we put in place right now in our current generation, we are not actually leaving behind something that's not healthy for the future generations. So this is a little bit of theory and a little bit of introduction about what all these terms is. And I thought that it would be very good to just kick off a little bit of understanding of what environmental sustainability and sustainable development is. And we also heard from our EPU speakers this morning about the Sustainable Development Goals in Malaysia. Prof. Aga also spoke about this, and I'm very sure the last speaker will also mention a little bit about this in relation to health. But in relation to environment, in fact, all of the 17 SDGs are actually linked to the environment itself. There are many other subsets of targets within these 17 goals, and in some way they're all linked to the environment. So a general maybe message to all our local councils out there and our listeners is that when we apply all these actions that are actually linked to environment, we're actually contributing towards this SDG. We are contributing to the goals. We are contributing to a global kind of collective ideas about what these aspired 2030 goals are. So that's what these SDGs are. All right, I'll move into the next bit of about wildlife and zoonotic disease. You might be wondering, how is this relevant to local councils, us for instance? Again, let's maybe go into a specific terms here. You might be wondering, I know about disease, but about coronavirus, but I do not know more about that. I thought this could actually help. The term zoonotic disease is not something very strange. In fact, in the Veterinary Public Health Ordinance of Sarawak, 1999, it has a definition for zoonotic disease. It means that any kind of disease that is communicable from animals to humans. So in other words, it can be transmitted from animals to humans. So what animals get it, they might or they may not show symptoms. They may be able to transmit that disease to human. That's what zoonotic disease is all about. So it has been defined in our VET, Public Health Ordinance, way back in 1999. Now, in relation to wildlife, the Sarawak Wildlife Protection Ordinance 1998 actually mentioned that no person at all shall sell or offer for sale or plan to be offering for sale any kind of wild mammal, bird, reptiles, or amphibians, or in fact, any kind of living things that are wild out there in its actual full form, which is the full animal form itself, or any recognizable part, such as the scales, the skin or whatsoever, that or any kind of derivative, which is such as some kind of jamu, whatever that's done from all of these concoctions or drinks. Yeah, so there's a law in the Sarawak Wildlife Protection Ordinance that actually prohibit people from selling any kind of these items. So in Sarawak, there's actually laws that are actually quite well drafted to deal with wildlife and also zoonotic disease. Yeah, and more recently, we heard a lot about COVID-19. COVID actually stands for coronavirus disease. Yeah, and 19 is just the year when it was described. It's actually caused by this SARS virus. Now, SARS is something to do with an acute respiratory syndrome kind of disease, right? It's a syndrome. It's the conditions that you're actually experiencing because of this virus. So the study that was commissioned by the World Health Organization, the WHO, reported widespread contamination of this virus in a wildlife market in Huanan in Wuhan. Yeah, and there is a very strong possibility that the virus was actually introduced to humans through the food chain. I think a lot of us actually knew about this already, that the virus COVID-19 actually originated from what people claim are actually from wild animals that were actually sold in the markets. And these are actually legal markets in Wuhan, China, and people were actually selling wild animals. And some of these wild animals actually originate from many parts of the world, including Southeast Asia and Malaysia, and not surprisingly, from certain sources from Sarawak as well. Things that bats, pangolins, and civets are all traded there. And it's a possibility that this virus, as what WHO put it, was actually introduced to humans through the food chain. So you're slowly piecing together what this zoonotic disease wildlife has to do with COVID and how is this relevant to our topic for today. This is a very simple diagram to show how the disease is transmitted. It was probably thought that the ecological reservoir, the source of this virus, was actually in bats, as you can see from the diagram on the top left. So the bats actually carry this virus, and it's been carrying it for many, many years. Yeah, it has remained in bats, but it's never been transmitted. And somehow it got passed down to other species of wildlife, such as pangolins or even snakes. And when humans come in contact with these animals, either through touching them or slaughtering them or poor hygiene or even eating them without properly cooking, they actually get this virus and it starts to spread. Nobody knew that things like this could actually create a global pandemic, and it's actually spreading all over the world and affecting so many millions of lives out there now. So in fact, this report here actually recommends that there's a warnings of visiting markets that sell live or slaughtered animals and really practice strict hygiene. Again, all of these results point to potential wildlife, animals that are sold in markets that are actually spreading these diseases, and that include COVID-19 that we're actually experiencing now. Now, at the local scene here in Sarawak, these are something features that we do see, and all of these photos and images were actually either captured here in Srava. I've mentioned that the Wildlife Protection Ordinance mentioned wildlife trading is actually, but that does not stop it from being sold illegally in weekend markets. Some of these photos were taken a few years back, and more recently, I've seen some of these animals still being sold currently in some of markets, and they are actually being sold illegally out of the sight of the authority and enforcement. Yeah, but again, we know that some of these were quite rampant in certain weekend markets. Like those picture above was actually taken in Bintulu, but that was maybe about 6-7 years ago, and more recently, people are actually advertising them on social media such as Facebook or even Instagram, and they are trying to now sell this using this social media platform and have it delivered discreetly to the buyers. And we never know what these animals actually host in terms of pathogens, bacteria, or even viruses. there's some species that are protected, as you see from the right side of the picture, which is a python, Ulasawa. It's actually a protected species in Sarawak, but it's one of those most commonly seen species that were actually traded. As recent as last year, I actually saw things like this being sold in markets, in the black market, illegally, and these places like Syria, and I've just seen these as well. At the bottom picture, those are not normal chicken wings or meat or beef, right? Those are the carcass and meat of clouded leopard. And it's, you probably wonder, like, do we even have this species? Yes, we do have this species, and it's actually quite rare. But they were actually hunted by people, and they were actually put up for sale. And this is publications that was done in 2017. Some of these that were actually illegally sold in places like Kapit. So, not to mention about us seeing some of these animals. People pay so much money to see these animals, but people are willing to pay money to actually eat these animals as well. And all of these are actually illegal. So I just want to pose these questions that this wild meat that are actually sold illegally could actually be host to the diseases and viruses out there. So we need to take note about this that is actually happening within some of our bazaars, towns, little communes area where people are actually selling this. Having said that, there's been a lot of enforcement by the authority. The Wildlife Protection Ordinance actually stipulates it's illegal to be selling all of these items. Heard reports after reports, media, newspaper reports. Now, SFC stands for Sarawak Forestry Corporation, which is the authority to enforce the wildlife protection, especially on the illegal sale of wildlife. They have captured people who were involved in illegal wildlife trade. They released these animals back to the wild. They confiscated all of these animals. On our part, WWF, we have published quite a number of media articles about some of these as well. And our message is very clear. Stay away from all of these wild meat. We never know what they harbor, and after all, it's also illegal to be consuming any of these wild animals. It's best to leave them out in the wild. You might be wondering now, why is this such a big issue? In fact, globally, this wildlife trade is a very lucrative trade out there. It's $1 billion industries, the drugs and arms dealing. This whole trade in wildlife is huge, big industries out there. And Malaysia, Sarawak, some of our longhouses are actually part of this whole supply chain, the network of people that actually send this out to the global community and also for local consumption. Just take, for instance, if you look into this picture on the right, this image here, and if you look into the second picture underneath the green frog, which is the pangolin, there in the year 2017-2019, Malaysia confiscated about 96,000 kilograms of pangolin scales, and all of these actually either come from within Southeast Asia or from Africa. It's a huge business out there. People are willing to pay money and buy. It is wiping out wildlife out there. The question now is, can we do something at the local authority level? I pose these questions to our listeners here. Can the local authorities actually help with ramping down of the illegal sale of wild meat out there? There's definitely a way that we can help by getting some of these materials, because they're actually trading illegally, and get the enforcement authorities such as Sarawak corporations together working with us. So this could be something that we can actually look at, and it will definitely help towards our SDG goals in terms of ensuring good health and diseases, and also life on land, which is about preserving species out there. So these actions would actually help. I'd like to move on to the next bit about economic development and environmental sustainability. A lot of us talk about economic development. How many times do we actually talk about environmental sustainability when we fight for budget? This is something that we need to actually take note of. Now, how do we balance these two? We like to pursue economic. We like to ensure that that development is in a very sustainable manner. Let's take a very recent incident, the logjam that actually happened along the Balai River that flows all the way down to the Rajang River and out to the sea. This is a very recent scenario, and I think our friends from Kapit, from Balai, from Belaga, and from even Cebu area, downstream to Sarike area, you know about this impact of the logjam. You felt it, although it happened many kilometers, hundreds of kilometers upstream, but we felt it because all of this actually flowed down along the river and actually affected so many other people. So the point is that whatever actions that are actually happening way in the interior, in the upstream, can actually aggregate. They will collect and then they will impact those people who live downstream. So these communities that are actually living downstreams will be affected as well. What we need is an integrated watershed approach. Everybody within that same watershed needs to have a say about what is happening there. So in this particular case of the Balai logjam, people who actually live in way down in coastal area of Cebu and Sarike, you are affected. Your water turn yellow, and you also have a stake. You have a say. You have a voice on what is actually happening in the upstream. You want it to be managed collectively and holistically. You probably ask, what do you mean by a watershed? And this diagram on the right gives you a very simple definition. Pretty much whatever that's drained within this particular basin, if you look, water is actually whole within the basins. So it's the mountain ranges that are pretty much headwaters, and the water will flow within that area. So if you just imagine how your river actually gets to you down in the city area, it must have flown from some high mountains area, and that's usually the source of it. And along the way, there are many users, and these are stakeholders, yeah? And we need to actually look into the economic, social, and environmental needs regarding the use of water. Everybody wants a share of the water. The dams need it, the local council need it, the water board needs it, the farmers need it to irrigate the field, and the fishermen need it further downstream to actually catch the fish. So everybody has a stake. You have a say in how this is done. So we need a very good understanding of what is our watershed, and the councils down in Cebu, Sarike, you have a say how the Balai catchments is being managed, how the entire Rajang catchments is being managed, and how the Kapit water catchment is managed as well. So in other words, wherever we are, the point is you have to look into this whole catchment approach. So pose this question to you all. What is your say on catchment management? Do you know which catchments you're actually situating within, and how you can actually have a say? These will help you provide clean water and sanitization for those people who live further downstream as well. And the next bit is about when we create cities, how can we actually map certain cities? And I know this is very close to a lot of our councils here, whether it's big cities, small towns, a little bazaar. We all have a role to play to ensure that when we bring development, we actually bring some kind of equity for social and environment as well. It actually involves quite a wide range of people. Yet a sustainable city or a little towns or bazaar actually require the involvement of various stakeholders out there. This diagram on the left shows you that there are actually three main groups that include the private sectors. We need these private sectors to come in. These are banking institutions who actually provide loans to businesses to actually set it up. You don't want high polluting industries to be sitting very close to your cities, and this is where you can actually influence them. You need people with good technical information about how to treat water as well. So those are the private sectors. you need government, and they are the regulatory framework. People from like the DID, Ministry of Utilities, they need to actually provide some guidance of what can be done in terms of land use within these areas. And that will actually help you create your sustainable city. And the last group is the civil society groups. These are the people themselves, the general public, the NGOs, who will then create some kind of awareness programs, instill environmental friendly lifestyles, like in fact, promotion of no plastic bags and stuff like that, or even recycling activities. They can work together with the government on this as well. So we need all these stakeholders. So hopefully that this idea will transcend down to our local councils here, that when you start planning, you don't only sit within the government framework, you need to actually extend it out to involve the private sectors and other civil society groups, so that you have some collective idea of what would be collective aspirations for a sustainable city. I just want to actually mention one particular program called One Planet City Challenge. You can click on the link, or you can just Google and find out what it is. My next slide will actually talk a little bit more about that. What we need is to create a city that can actually bring economic growth, create a very livable and sustainable environment for all. But all of this is actually very challenging because people have got different expectations and different needs. Ask these questions to our participants. Do we have a sustainable city aspiration? Perhaps it's start today, having heard from this morning from about waste management. Perhaps we can, as a start, how do we actually create a sustainable city that actually adopt maybe even a zero waste approach, or even more ambitious, zero carbon approach. So that's first time. Now this is a little bit of a little knowledge about what do you know that for every 30 minutes. So let's start off. Do you know that for every 30 minutes, if you start in the time, 500 people could actually die from air pollution, from fossil fuels. Yeah. 285 million is the price tag for social such as corruptions and all those bits. In 30 minutes, 268 million is subsidy that we have to hand out for fossil fuels. And if you cycle, you would cycle 12 kilometers on an electric bike. If you're on a bike, it's about 8 kilometers. And the 30 minutes would have actually strengthened your hearts, reduce your stress and your lives. But last but not least, once you're there, you have probably taken 450 breaths, which is provided by oxygen from Mother Nature. So this is the wonder of environmental sustainability. All these figures will just thoughts for you as to the values of that 30 minutes in your life. Now go into this One Planet City Challenge. There's a lot more benefits cities adopted. There are many cities in Malaysia that have actually done. Shah Alam, the Petaling Jaya, Melaka, they're all part of this city challenge. And mentioned that EPU speakers actually mentioned the Shah Alam low carbon policy, and they're actually part of this One Planet. There's a lot of benefits if you're program. You get support from the private policymakers and from public. You have a good reporting systems according to international standards. You can actually receive feedbacks on efforts on how to improve, how we can actually do better. There's a media interest and coverage. You get international coverage for this. There's a national recognition for the efforts made. We have already heard this morning from the EPU slides. There's also, we can also learn from international experts. And last but not least, you will be contributing to a national directive and also to the global aspirations in carbon greenhouse gas reduction. Malaysia has pledged to reduce up to 45% of carbon dioxide emissions intensity of the GDP by 2030 as compared to the 2005. It was about 40% that was pledged for 2020, and they were thinking that they can actually up it up to 45. That's a very good ambition by Malaysia. So the question now is to our local councils, do we have targets or any kind of ambitions set up by our local authorities? We need to set out a plan with a target to move towards these SDG goals, and we frame out some plans and actions to get to it. Now, there are some guiding principles when we want to create sustainable cities. It involves quite a huge commitments. how do we commit to renewable energy? What is the ability to drive change? What are the mitigation actions? How do we have any renewable energy shift actions moving from high carbon to low carbon? Like, for instance, the bus in Kuching is a very good example. We're actually shifting from diesel-powered bus to hydrogen-powered bus. Driving energy efficiency, how do we promote more green buildings out there? Can we have more core benefits and spread across the board that everybody else gets to? These newspaper clippings of some of the things done by the local councils on styrofoams, on smart city, no plastic bags, biodegradable bag. These are commendable efforts by the local councils. Perhaps we're all wondering here is what are the progress of all of these initiatives, and do we have the reports to actually show? We also heard that reporting is very important as part of our voluntary reporting, and the Kuching, Cebu, Miri, or any other local councils all over in Sarawak can actually be part of this process. We've seen this slide from Prof. And I'm not going to repeat, but the key point is this is about how Malaysia mismanaged the plastic waste. We are ranked top 11 in the world in countries that are actually polluting oceans. We're also in the top 10. Again, China is number 1 up there. But the point is this, you might be wondering, I throw my plastics. What does that mean? These will eventually flow out to the rivers and out to the sea. Now, almost 700 marine species are known to be impacted by plastic ingestions or entanglement. They get caught, they got what we call trapped in plastics and stuff like that. And when they eat plastics, they have problem digesting. They will slowly die. Almost all of sea turtle species have evidence of plastics in their guts. They eat them because they think they look like jellyfish. By 2050, the cost for incineration of plastics will be about 10 to 13% of our annual carbon budget. And we cannot be just keep on burning them. We need to do something to reduce them. There's a loss of 2.5 trillion in benefits from marine ecosystem services that are actually affected due to plastic pollutions. And 75% of plastic leakage in the oceans come from uncollected waste. We have already heard this from Prof. Aga this morning. In other words, plastic is a serious issue in Malaysia and also in Sarawak itself. Ask these questions: how will the local authorities control consumptions? How do we actually manage plastic waste? We need to actually have this thought, among us. Lastly, is about collective platform and discussion. I mentioned the term stakeholder. Probably wondering, what do you mean by stakeholder? The stakeholder is actually an individual, a group. It can be a group of, from a longhouse or an institution, having a specific stake in the landscape. You have to say, and who is indirectly or directly affecting or affected by any decision concerning the landscape. I just want to share this diagram here. It shows that forest can be a landscape, a watershed, whatever. So the stakeholders can actually affect that environment, and the environment can actually be affected by the stakeholders. We need to carry out stakeholder analysis. You might be wondering, who are my stakeholders? You need to do this to understand what is the landscape reality of this area that we're working on. How can we create a mutual understanding and common concern? How can we facilitate a shared learning process? And how can we actually empower and also build capacities of these people within this particular landscape? So these are all very important stakeholders. So when we designed programs and action plans, I think one key question is ask ourselves, have we identified, have we engaged with the stakeholders? Issues, challenges, identify who the stakeholders are, but I think it's very important that we actually engage as many as we can. There are many ways to do this, and it has to be a very collective actions. You need some FPIC, which is the free, prior, informed consent approach to actually talk to them. Talking to one person within a longhouse does not mean that you have already reached out to the entire longhouse. You must be able to reach out to the majority of them, or if not all of them. So these are certain things that we need to take into consideration when we do a stakeholder engagement. So I pose this question to our listeners here is that have we actually identified this, and when we actually designed our programs and actions? I want to point to one particular example of our work where we work with some communities up in Long Semado area. And I see them present here today. This is a project that was done way back in 2017, 2018. We wanted to work on behavioral change, trying to influence the communities about waste management. The map on the right there shows you where these communities are. You'd probably be wondering, wow, that's actually quite interior, quite close to the Indonesian borders. Yes, it takes about 3-4 hours to get there from Lawas town. And the picture on the bottom shows there's some serious issues on waste management, and this will actually lead to some health problems. The school are actually throwing out rubbish just down the alley, and some of the rubbish are actually thrown into the river, and they just get collected and tangled on roots. This is a serious problem up here. We did some household surveys. We asked them what are the waste that are actually produced. And as you can see, the biggest chunk, 30%, is actually plastic waste. That's the chart. And how do they actually throw all of this? And again, 38% say they either burn it, 20%, the yellow one, says that they will just throw it by the valley, and 21% say they'll try to bury them into a hole. Yeah. In other words, none of these actually were collected by the councils. None of them were actually recycled. And all of these were just disposed of. I think that's the key point here. Our results show that there is a poor waste management. Many of them either burned or they have a very little sense of recycling. The village level actions such include gotong royong among all of them, and they have very little reliance on the council because it's too far away. It's logistically almost impossible to get there. 80% of them are actually unaware of environmental impacts of solid waste, but almost all of them actually agree that this problem can be managed. They want to do something, but they didn't know that their actions of throwing rivers into the river are actually quite detrimental in the long run. So some of the challenges is that the local councils have do not have the funds to build incinerator. Actually, it require a lot of elaborate paperwork and also investment. And there's also this not in my backyard mentality. When we want to build some proper dumping site, say not in my garden, not in my backyard, this is my land somewhere else. There's logistic problems due to remoteness, not to mention during the rainy season, where it's almost very difficult to reach certain parts of this village. There's a lack of public awareness, and there's also no recycling collection point in Lawas. This was about 3-4 years back when we collected this data. I'm not sure if things have changed, but the main question here is, like the pose is, how do we actually cater for needs of the rural communities in areas where they actually lack waste management system? One way that we could actually do is increasing awareness programs through dialogues, sessions, like what we have done here. We can also provide very simple but yet effective monitoring and data collection system. Give them a very clear guidance as to how they can actually collect data and then send the report back to councils to actually monitor. Let's work on some community empowerment and citizen science approach of data collection. So we can actually do this by providing them the necessary fund. So I'll just pose this question to you all. How can we actually encourage the local levels in both the monitoring and also in reporting? So it's something that we can. I'd like to finish off with this last slide here now. With all of this sharing, just perhaps some back messages for about how we can promote awareness and a sense of appreciation of the environment. We can actually work with the media. The local authority can work with the media and try to actually share more information about actions that actually improve on your communications. People need to be aware the impacts of life, impacts of plastics, what are the laws and regulations out there, what is it that's not allowed. So this is something maybe at the local authority can actually work on to your communication aspect of this. you need to actually strengthen enforcement work with relevant authority. If there's lacking in your current policies or regulations, maybe it's timely to actually review them and look into regulations, empower your enforcement officers to confiscate perhaps wildlife, or to actually enforce the ban on use of plastics or single-use plastics, for instance. We heard about this in terms of funding, and this is, everybody will say that we need the funding to actually do it. I've also heard that this morning, it was actually mentioned in the Malaysia plan, 250 billion were actually allocated for SDGs. But somehow I see in that slide, it was actually missing the element on environment. It was mostly related to health, well-being of people, on social and economic. Perhaps we can actually pay more attention to environment and to have that special categories that the SDG money, through either RMK money or through whatever funds that we have, will be allocated for environmental protection. With this money, that we can actually empower local people out there, and build the capacity of the local authority to actually carry out some of these actions that we put in place. Again, it's a collective actions by all parties. There must be a will to change. We need our mayors, we need our ministers, we need all of this to actually announce this. I'm quite glad our ministers speech said that this is very important. We need to actually move on that will, and there must be a vision to living. Perhaps this could be a starting point for our discussion next 2 days. Is there a will to change? Is there a common target that we like to work? So with that, I just want to end by saying that I think human and nature relationship is a very complex thing, but it's a responsibility of us human here to protect and conserve nature. And I think collectively we all can move towards these SDG goals, and I look forward to local councils in moving towards that by strong, good action plans for these SDGs. With that, thank you so much for listening. That's my email. If anyone need to contact me for information, I'll be very happy to. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jason. Yeah, you are missing your sound a little bit, but I think overall, I think we are still able to understand and still able to get your points. So you definitely have raised plenty of pertinent questions, and I think this is something that we can also brought up later during the Q&A sessions later on. I believe the local authorities might be able to respond to some of these questions during the Q&As as well. So we'll now move to the last papers for this morning, which is on strengthening public health programs in local authorities in Sarawak by Yang Berbahagia Professor Dato' Dr. Andrew Q. So I will briefly introduce Yang Bahagia Dato', although he's no stranger to Sarawak. So Professor Dato' Dr. Andrew Q is currently a Professor of Public Health in the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences, University Malaysia of Sarawak. He joined UNIMAS in 2017. He has over 40 years of experience in public health, initially as a District Medical Officer of Health, then as an epidemiologist, Deputy Director for Public Health in Sarawak, and finally as the Sarawak State Health Director. He was involved in the management of diseases outbreak, notably the hand, foot, and mouth diseases outbreak in 1997, SARS in 2003, Nipah in 1998, and now COVID-19. He is an honorary consultant epidemiologist as well as honorary advisor for Healthy City for Sarawak government. So with that, I would like to invite Dr. Andrew to start the presentations. Over to you, Dr. Andrew.
Okay, thank you, Rosalind, for the introduction. And I would like to thank the organizers, the SDI, as well as the local authorities, Ministry of Local Government, to invite me to present my views on this topic. I need to be able to share my screen.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so Yeah, so my topic is strengthening public health program in the local authorities in Sarawak. And the target for this strengthening actually is mainly at the Ministry of Local Government itself, but it has also relevance to the councils, especially the bigger councils and so on. So the topics that I would cover will be these. There are 9 of them: the definitions of health and public health, the history of local authorities and public health in the UK as well as in Sarawak, the goals of strengthening public health programs in local authorities in Sarawak, the contribution of various sectors to health status. Why is the local authority important in this, for instance? And we'll just go through a little bit of the frameworks that we can work on, the functions of LAs in Malaysia, the entry points to strengthen public health programs in local authorities in Sarawak. And we have a very good opportunity to start doing this now, very soon, okay? And if we do this, then we will be in charge of our own futures, okay? So this looks complicated to you, but I will guide you through this. This is how the things that I mentioned just now are connected to each other. And we will start just with a definition here about what health is, because some of you might not know this. Of course, for us in public health field, we know this very well, that health is a complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not just the absence of disease and infirmity. And this is important because even a physical disability doesn't mean that you cannot have health. And I would like to share with you this picture of our Paralympian Bonnie, who got a world record and so on, in spite of him being not not physically, in the old days we would have said not physically healthy, okay? But we know that it is a combination of this, okay? The next thing is, having talked about health, what actually is public health? So there are 2 parts of the term public health. The first one is, what is the health of the public? And one simple measure is just like the life expectancy of birth for people, like in Malaysia, for instance, those who were born in 2020, for instance, females will expect to live for 77 years, whereas males usually about 5 years shorter, and so on, 72 years, and so on. So this is the first meaning of public health. The other one is, sorry, but the public health service, the policies, the systems, and so on. And this is what we are focusing on in my talk. It's regarding the services and the programs that authorities provide, some of them by the Ministry of Health, Sarawak Health Department, and also together with the local authorities here in Sarawak. So there are a few core functions of public health in England. It depends on which country you are in. The UK, they have one. In the US, they have the core functions of public health. They have 10 of them. In the UK, where we are very closely, we follow their system very closely. So the core functions, the first one is protecting the population health from infectious disease and other hazards. And we have seen previous speakers talking about this, from the infectious diseases, the zoonotic diseases that you get from animals, and from improper handling of food and waste and other things. And the second function is improving the population health and well-being by reducing health inequalities, because health inequality is very important. The poorer people are, the more chance they have to have bad health effects. And this can be seen very clearly with the COVID situation now and so on, where it adversely affects those who are very poor, for instance. And then improving population health by supporting sustainable health and care services. So it's not just a sustainable environment, but also healthcare and so on, and building a capacity and capability of the public health system. So all this will be very important to remember when we think about how we are going to strengthen public health programs in the local authorities as well as in the Ministry of Local Government itself later on. So if we go back to the history of public health, we have to remember that our local authorities and public health, their roles is very closely tied to the British system, because they were the ones who helped to develop this thing for us, and we bear that history together. Public health and the local authorities go a long way back from the Victorian era. You can see here from the Victorian era to 1948, just after the Second World War and so on. And then in the UK, after the Second World War, the National Health Service was formed. And unfortunately, they took over the whole thing about public health. But what they took over was more of the hospital system. And that's why the NHS now is one of the very good systems in the world, I should say. A lot of people are following. Of course, there are weaknesses as well. But they took care mainly of the hospitals, but the public health in the local authorities were almost like left behind, you know, and so on. And after so many years, the NHS in 1974 took over most of those public health functions, and then now they're giving it back because they said that the local governments, you remember the different levels of government. We have national government, we have state government, we have local government for them because they are elected, but ours, we call it local authority and so on. Because the reason they said is that they have a population focus, because they're able to shape the services to meet the local needs, because they're able to influence the wider social determinants of health. I will explain a little bit about this later on. And they're able to tackle the health inequalities. But it's, so this is what they expect. They think that the local government, the local authorities, which they say is the natural home of public health, just like I showed just now from the Victorian era to the Second World War and so on, they think that they are able to influence the major determinants of health, namely housing, environment, education, sorry, another environment here, but economic development, okay? But it's bad timing for them to do this because the local government in the UK has been stripped of much of its previous roles. They've been reduced to commissioning social care from a range of inadequate private sector social care providers because they don't have the staff. Just like in Peninsular Malaysia, they have, it's like commissioning, you know, the fogging services to control dengue, for instance. And the budget has been drastically cut. They have no influence on housing provision anymore, and they have very limited resources for environmental and consumer protection. Don't you think that this sounds like what is happening in Sarawak as well? It does. So while I'm talking, that's why I'm talking about, while I'm talking about strengthening it, we have to remember all these weaknesses that the system have over all these years. And they said that there is a risk that the UK is doing that because they're putting public health in an organization of declining influence, power, and resources. And probably that will make them unable to deliver its potential to put health in all policies. This is the history of local authorities. Of course, we are talking about the role of local authorities in public health. And I think I would agree with the writer of this because I think that public health and local authorities in Sarawak, their role in public health has been declining. Okay, and now is the time for us to take action, because if we don't take action, you can see that the actual performance of public health by the local authorities will slowly go down, and then at the end of the day, it will be taken away completely from the local authorities and so on, which will be a sad state of affairs. Okay, so now I go to Sarawak because the history of, like I mentioned, goes back to the Brooke time and also to the colonial time. And it was started in 1921, the sanitary board, because they were British. Of course, they follow the British system. And then the members of the Kuching Sanitary Board comprised mainly of government officials and so on. And after World War II, they formed the colonial government, took over from the Brooks, as we know in history. They formed the town boards in the 3 major cities of Kuching at the time, the major urban areas. And during this period, local government provided, you can see all these services. Some of it are still here. Public libraries are still there, recreational services still there, public utilities still there. Low cost housing, you can only see in Kuching, the Padungan flats and so on. Planning to some extent, firefighting has been taken out, primary education has been taken out. Public health is like gasping for air. It's almost drowned, almost disappeared. And there are reasons for that, okay? And that's the sad part of it about public health and local authorities, because they do have a big role to play. So during the formation of the local authorities in Sarawak, they formed a health inspectorate unit. They still have this unit, but now it is very depleted of services. And the size of the unit depended on the needs and so on. And the unit provides environmental sanitation, which are all these, to some extent, these things they are still supposed to be doing, you know, the suppression of disease, vector control, supervision and sale of food, public places and private buildings, and offensive trades and so on. So the food, I think, is still, they're doing a lot of it, but these two, it has truly declined. The vector-borne services and so on. Sorry, I got a phone call. Okay, I got distracted, but okay. So there are other public health services provided by the local authorities, include refuse collection, conservancy, which is an area of land kept in its natural state. These are the parks and so on. Maintenance of markets, slaughterhouses, public latrines, and other numerous inspection duties and so on. And of course, these are done by the health inspectors. Those days now they are called environmental health officers or assistant environmental health officers. The numbers have been depleted, as I mentioned. So now if we look at the recent past, what happens? The role of the local authorities in providing maternal and child health clinics, maternity homes, family planning has been taken over by the federal government, namely the Ministry of Health. I think it was in 1979. These dates are subject to my memory because I cannot find any proof of this in the time that of these dates that I was preparing this. And then in 1985-87, I remember this because I was in Miri, the vector control activity and the staff were greatly reduced. And then somewhere in early 2000, there was a big outbreak of dengue in Selangor. And the Ministry of Local Government at peninsular level were unable to do the vector control and so on. And because of that, the Ministry of Health took over control of vector control activities from the Ministry of Local Government. This is at federal level. And from there, the whole thing, I think, almost collapsed the system, because now the vector control activities, of course, they still do fogging, but it's very, very much reduced compared to what their role should be. So that's the recent history. So what's the goal when we strengthen the public health program in local authority areas? Of course, we are looking at not just health as we defined just now, but wellness and well-being, and there are differences in this, okay? So we are talking not just about health, we want to talk about well-being. And when we talk about well-being, depending on who talks about it, who writes about it, it has a relationship with the environment. It's how satisfied we are with our life, how comfortable we are in our present situation, and it's influenced by a healthy environment, our relationship with others and so on, exercise, sense of purpose, and many others. Relationship with others will be related to social capital, which I will be mentioning a little bit about later on. Whereas wellness is a journey, our own journey, focus on our individual journey to happiness and so on. So I would say that the purpose of the local authorities when they do this is to promote the well-being of the population that lives in the local authority areas. Okay. So when we do this, we have to be aware of this health pyramid, because you can see that which one has the greatest impact on the population and which one increase individual effort a lot. So you can see that among the socio-economic factors and changing the environment such that healthy choice become the easiest choice, those are the ones that will have the most impact on the population of the people, on the health of the population. And this is where local authorities have a big role to play. Okay, and in fact, in Ohio, for instance, in the US, they've taken the health impact pyramid just now, and they have looked at what the local health departments and local authorities will do. This is a complex diagram, so I make it simpler. So this was the health impact pyramid. Of course, you can imagine that there is a pyramid like this, but you can see that the socio-economic factors, changing the context to make individuals' default decision healthy. That means the healthier choice is the easiest choice. And the way to remember this is, if you don't want people to throw rubbish everywhere in the street, then you have to provide rubbish bins available. Of course, I'm not talking about Japan, where they don't have rubbish bins and people carry they're so well advanced that they carry their rubbish home with them and throw in their own rubbish bin. So this is the primary role for local authorities, to assure a safe and healthy environment, which is environmental health services, protecting people from disease. These are the communicable disease control from the food point of view and other things, and also to make policies and environmental change and prevent injuries and other things. Okay, and these are things that they can do to promote health. They have to work with education, economic development, and so on and so on. So we have to bear this in mind when we think about how we want to, where is the entry point that we want to do when we want to strengthen public health in the local authority areas. Now I would like to go to this, because this is very important to remember. People think that if you want to improve the health of people, especially the politicians, they will say we want clinics, we want hospitals. Of course, that is very important. But the impact of the health sector on health outcomes as measured by length of life. Remember, just now I mentioned about the health life expectancies and so on, quality of life, which is wellness and other things. The health sector contribute only 20% to the outcome of this. And the others, you can see that physical environment, the social and economic factors, and the health behaviors. So these are the very important ones. And local authorities have a big role to play in this, because this refers to parks and businesses and other things, okay? And there are a few frameworks. I just run through them. Of course, in Sarawak, many councils are very familiar with this, about the healthy city model that was first developed by Dr. Trevor Hancock. And in Sarawak and in Malaysia, I have modified this, because last time when we followed this, people say that why should you ask us to take part in healthy cities? This is health. This is the job of the health department and so on. So for Malaysia as well, for Sarawak, the healthy cities is actually Bandar Sejahtera. It's not healthy cities. It's for that reason that we are looking at the well-being here. We're not looking at kesihatan, okay? And of course, what the previous speakers have mentioned about sustainable development, sustainable environment, and so on, are all encapsulated here. In fact, this diagram is also used as part of the sustainable development Venn diagram as well. So the other thing that I want you all to be aware of is the social determinants of health. In public health, we talk about, when we talk about what will make people get sick, what will make them get healthy, there are two broad categories of determinants. One of them is the non-modifiable ones. Nothing much we can do about it. Your age, your sex, your constitutional factors, which are your genetic makeup and so on, for instance. But the rest are modifiable. You can change your lifestyle factors, don't smoke, exercise, and many other things. Social and community networks, this is the social capital part of it. And then we have to make all this healthy as well as economically productive and so on. So this is the famous rainbow model of determinants of health. So you can see the local authorities can have, of course, this one, nobody, you change your sex, you're still, your sex chromosome will still be the XY or XX. But these are the ones that we can modify. And these are the things that the local authorities can look at, okay? And some people have went into detail with this. For instance, like lifestyle, there is the library, the leisure centers. For community, we have social cohesion, which is social capital, the local economy, the activities, you can see training schemes, benefit advice, the built environment, the housing, the building control, the natural environment, the air quality, the parks, and so on, and so on. So these are, you can see this, that these are things that local authorities have a role to play in, and they can contribute their part to this, okay? And now I look at the Sustainable Development Goals. Of course, this have been mentioned a lot, but just to see where it jives with us, the SDGs will end in 2030, and that's the time also that Sarawak aim to be a developed state by 2030 and so on. I brought this, this up because this was written by Urbanize, and the EPU just now mentioned about Urbanize and so on. But what is good about this is that they have listed all the possible roles that local authorities can play with each of the 17 SDGs. So I won't go into detail with them, but just to show you what they have done with this, and these are good ideas that we can look at when we talk about the role of local authorities later on in the SDGs, okay? So now I would like to, the next thing I want you to remember is the eras of public health. Public health have changed. There was a time when people thought that ill health was due to bad air, and that's how we get the term malaria, for instance, mild air. And then later on, germ theory, and people thought that, wow, now everything is caused by germs. And then the antibiotics come, and people say, wow, now we don't need to worry about disease anymore. We have all these antibiotics, and then we have antibiotic resistance and so on. But now the time is health promotion, and this is where we are, where we promote health, and people will have responsibility for their own health, and we want them to attain the optimal health levels, okay? And the new public health actually started with this book, 1988, by Professor John Aston. But there is a difference between how the old public health and the new public health look at things. So the new public health, the emphasis is placed on the population, not on the individuals. And they work through the social factors, the determinants of health that I showed just now, and the factors that are responsible for inequality. There was a time when, for instance, somewhere here where people are scolded for getting ill, you know, and they say that because you don't look after your health, you get ill. But here now, we think that it is the society that is responsible as well. Just think of all the foods that we eat. Do we have parks to exercise in, and so on? How is the air polluted by vehicle emissions and things like that? So that's a new public health, and that's where we are going, okay? And in order to strengthen this public health program, we have to look at the functions of local authorities in Malaysia. Because this one, they refer to local authorities in Peninsular Malaysia, and whether it applies to Sarawak, I think it should be the same as well. The environmental aspects, the social and public health aspects, the physical aspects, and the security aspects. Of course, there are many things that they discuss about in this particular article about how the local authorities can function in each of these four main functions of the local authorities. And if we look at the entry points, where can local authorities go to? I have this diagram, and I start with the environment. And when I think about environment, of course, there are many ways to consider this, but I'm thinking about environmental pollution, and we think about soil and land pollution, we think about air pollution, we think about water pollution, but there is also, apart from these physical environments, we have the social environment. And because we're talking about the local authorities, we have these food premises, we have the wet markets, which the local authorities are in charge of. So we look at land and soil and how we get pollution and adversely affect our health. You can see that we have roles to play in solid waste management and scheduled waste, plastics, and this has been mentioned just now. But also, vector-borne control activities is part of this because the vectors are breeding in discarded containers and so on and so on. And with air pollution, then you have a role in traffic and transport, and also smoking, because smoking of cigarettes in public, the local authorities also have a role in this, in enforcing this, together with the Ministry of Health and Sarawak Health Department, for instance. And then water, we have liquid waste and also plastic waste that has been mentioned. And just think that our liquid waste only in Kuching, and probably, I don't know about the one in Bintulu, whether it's still working or not, you know, the sewerage services and so on. Other councils still don't have this in a big way yet. And then with food premises, we have food safety and quality, food premises inspection, food premises licensing. These are very important roles of the local authorities, and we can strengthen this further. And with regards to the wet markets, of course, we can talk about healthy markets and so on, and also there should be an absence of live animals in these markets, no more live chicken and so on, because these are very dangerous to have. Lots of viruses coming from when you have live animal markets, from chicken and so on. And the public parks, we need open spaces, how we green the spaces, and also beautification is not just about the parks, but we have to make them attractive and maintained properly so that people are using them. And a very important one is the social environment. Of course, we need to make them inclusive, equitable, harmonious, and so on. And you would say that Kuching is a city of unity, for instance, but we need to work on this and make it real. And we need to, of course, just now people already talk about community development, because this is part of the social environment and how it interacts with social capital. They both affect each other. So these are the possible entry points for strengthening public health program in Sarawak. And just now, of course, have been mentioned about solid waste, but there is this study that was done, published just last year about the solid waste management in local authorities in Sarawak. So 5 major problems: low waste collection coverage, increasing waste generation, presence of large amount of organic waste, low waste segregation, and financial constraints faced by small and remote local authorities, okay? And apart from that, law enforcement also is a problem, and lack of staff to enforce these and so on. We are all aware of this. We have seen all these kinds of pictures, and when we drive, we see them along the way and so on. So these are things that need to be solved. So when we talk about the environment also, we need to develop the community. Of course, there are definitions here, and what is going to be done is that we harness the innate abilities and potential of the local communities and so on, and they will become active agents in their own development. Of course, in Sarawak, we have talks about our system of JKK, case, jawatan kuasa, kemajuan, keselamatan, kesihatan. You put all the case there, and we have a system of temongongs and pemancas and tua kampungs and so on. So that's part of it, but we need to have more. I think we don't have enough of community development in this. And when we talk about that, of course, we talk about community capitals, and the important ones for us when we are doing this are the 3 economic capitals: social and cultural capital. And social capital is very important because it has been found to affect how healthy our lives are, but also how fulfilling our lives are. When we talk about well-being, wellness, mental and social well-being, and so on. And social capital actually there are 2 preconditions. One of them is the collective assets of the community, how they trust each other, what are their norms. And we also have structural and positional variation, because different people have different access to these. When people who are richer in the community, then they will have greater access to these. And then later on, they will access the network of this social capital. And this accessibility will also cause them to use the context to get resources and so on. And the benefits of social capital will be one that is called instrumental. That means people will give you advice. They say, I know how to go to the bank. I know how to get help while we're in COVID-19 and so on. And the other one is expressive. This is emotional support and encouragement. And this is just as important when people are under quarantine and so on, they need support. So social capital is very important, and that's something I think that we need to develop as well. So this is, like I said, a very opportune time for us because people are talking about autonomy for Sarawak health services. And we have been talking about it since last year and many years back and so on. And the other one is the formation of the Sarawak Infectious Disease Center, which has been approved by CM, 200 million, and he wants it operational by 2024. The reason I mentioned this is that once we have the Sarawak Infectious Disease Center, we need to amend this law. This is very good for us because Sarawak kept this instead of giving it up last time. And among the things, for instance, we can say that funds from compounds issued by local authority staff, for example, for smoking, people who, the vector-borne disease control and so on, can go to local authority instead of to central fund of federal government and so on, and so on. So definitely we're going to amend this for the Sarawak Infectious Disease Center, but I think the local authorities should take this opportunity to strengthen its role in public health in Sarawak. And the other opportunity is that I know that UNIMAS is engaging with Yayasan Sarawak, the Sarawak Foundation, to ask them to provide training funds to train the medical officers so that they will become, they will get their masters in public health and also go to doctor of public health. And then they will become later on the public health medicine specialist. And they will, if the local authorities hatch onto this, they combine with this, they can say that we want the Sarawak Foundation to train this staff for us. And then later on, they will join the local government in Sarawak, especially the bigger councils. Actually, the local councils should have posts for their own medical officers and public health officers, but this has disappeared over the years. And now I think this is a very, very important time if you want to take part in this, because it takes 4 years for the program to finish and before they can work with the local government. So if you miss this, I think you are going to miss a golden opportunity. Of course, there are others that we need to develop and to get as well. For instance, the food technologies, environmental health officers, entomologists, as I mentioned just now, if you want to strengthen the public health program in the local authority areas. So now, with that, we can look at our own future. We will be in charge of our own future. And there are 4 kinds of futures: the probable, plausible, possible, preferable, and so on. And these are examples of it. If you don't do anything now, the most thing that will happen will be the probable. This is the projected, because it will be business as usual. And you remember the declining role of local authorities in public health will decline more and more. What we want is the preferable future, and this is shown in green here. So we want this to happen, and for this to happen, we need to plan. We need to be brave, because if we are not brave enough, we will fall into one of these failures. There is failure of imagination of established experts. So they said we have to say that things will happen. And they say that when he states that something is impossible, the expert is probably wrong. So that's the first law of this Arthur C. Clarke, a very famous writer of science fiction and so on. Failure of courage to reach out of the echo chamber and comfort zone. So we need to reach out. We need to escape from this, our coconut shell and so on, and improve, get back public health to where it was in the local authorities. And we need to look at advanced technology and so on, failure to understand novel concepts and categories and so on. So that is in summary what I have prepared for how I think we should strengthen public health program in the local authority areas in Sarawak. And with that, I would like to share with you all these various photos of the public parks that are available in various parts of Sarawak. So thank you very much. Back to you, Rosalind.
Thank you, Dato'. So with that, thank you once again to Dato' Andrew for the presentations. With that, we are finished with all the 4 papers presentations for this morning. So we will now proceed to the Q&A sessions, which is only catered for the roundtable participants. So on behalf of the ministry, I would like to thank those who are joining in and listening in to the paper presentations via UCA's YouTube live channels.